Hi, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. So I know that this is way different time than what I'm used to meeting. Usually it's like 9 p.m. Eastern on a weekday, like a Tuesday or so. But we decided to try a Saturday evening at about 8 p.m. Just to see, if this time works better for a lot of people, to give that opportunity to other people who might not be able to make it during the week for my normal lives. So I know that it's football season right now. I know. And so there's probably a lot of people who are choosing to watch football game right now that'd be here, and that's okay. But I wanted, excuse me, I am getting over being sick. So I have my water here. If I'm looking a little not all there, earlier this week, oh man, it was bad. Like not and crazy enough, it wasn't any sort of respiratory thing. It had a high fever and aches to the center of my bones like I have never experienced before. It was crazy. So we've been dealing with that. But I'm feeling better each day. So hello, everyone. All right. So I do see that we have some Grainies here. I see Kimberly, Ellen. I know a lot of y'all are my Grainies. It's wonderful that y'all are here. All right. So we got Deborah. We're just seeing where everyone's from. Dan says COVID. Yeah, I think it actually was the Rona this time, but it's weird. And my husband is experiencing, like, his smell is off and his taste buds are off. I know my taste buds were a little off as well. And whatever devil this is needs to go back to the pit of Hades where it came from. So, okay. So welcome everyone. We got people from Oklahoma, Susan from Indiana, Deborah from Michigan. Let me see here. Southwest Virginia, mid-Missouri. So, Ontario. So our Canadian neighbors up north. So welcome everyone. So for those who do not know, the reason why I wanted to hop on here and this is kind of going to be more focused for newbies, but I also have a lot of questions that I gathered on Instagram. I asked for any questions that people had. So just kind of a general FAQ. I will not be able to hit every single one of them, but I will try to hit as many as I can. So do know, real quick, a few general announcements. First of all, if you ever want to guarantee that your questions are answered by me, we do have the Grainie bunch. I mentioned that I've got some Grainies here for y'all, and I'll link this actually in the chat box, and then later on it'll be in the description box below for those who are not watching this live. But the Grainie Bunch is basically an elite group of supporters who support Grains and Grit, and also forming a community of like-minded Grainies, where we have hangouts. We actually just had a live hangout last night, and where we get to know each other better, help each other out, and just kind of form that community. But it's also a way that you can support me here at Grains and Grit. So I really appreciate all of that. Secondly, and I will mention this again, because a lot of the questions that I received about those who are new to milling wheat, do know that many of these questions are in a free newbie milling guide that I do have for y'all. So if you've not gotten it yet, it's just a guide that I put together basically with a lot of the FAQs that I get, but also links to many of the videos that I have done answering those questions. So that way, you don't have to like search through all of my YouTube channel. I know I've got a lot of videos on there now. And so it's just kind of a good guide to kind of walk you through the steps if you're new to milling, like kind of in a logical format, and then answering those questions, but also any videos or recipes, things like that. It's kind of linked. So just know that it is free. And I did link that in the chat box, and it'll be in the description box as well. So be sure to check those out, because many of those questions can be answered there. Or if you just need more information. Alrighty. All right. Hello from Southwest Florida. Hey, fellow Floridian. So good to have y'all here. Mm. Okay, I will be drinking a lot of water because I'm still getting over this sickness. But all right, so we're gonna go ahead and start. So let me know in the chat box if you were actually new to milling your own grains. And for those of you who aren't new, let us know how long you have been milling, if you kind of consider yourself an intermediate or maybe even advanced when it comes to milling. I'm kind of curious to see where everyone is, so you can just type that all out in the chat box. But the biggest thing that I want to remind y'all is that this is a journey and we're all on different levels. So in case you do not know, I have been milling for over a decade now. And when I first started milling my wheat, I was also barely able to cook. I was still fairly newly married, and I was still struggling with just cooking meals, much less baking, much less milling my own wheat, getting my own flour, all of that things. And it took me years really to get to the level I'm at now. I didn't have anyone really. Sue Becker had her long classes and stuff, but it was kind of overwhelming. There really wasn't information on YouTube, or everyone used all-purpose flour, or if they used freshly milled wheat, it had all-purpose flour as well. So it's kind of been it was frustrating for me. A lot of trial and error. Thankfully, my husband supported me through this. And it wasn't until really about a year before I started my channel that I finally got it. And that's because I just started doing my own recipes. I'd now gotten more comfortable cooking and regular baking, that now I could start getting my brain wrapped around making my own recipes and figuring out what didn't work. So just know that it is a journey. And my goal really is to kind of help y'all start, better off than what I did, to not take years of trial and error to get good bread. Okay, so let me see what everyone's saying here. We have, okay, so we got people who've been doing this for 4 months. Okay, Ellen, she's one of my Grainies, probably over 15 years on and off. Good job. Rosie, 1 year. Sue, milling for 2 years. Lori, been milling for about 1.5 years, still learning. All right, we got 3 years from Leanne. Okay, Patty's so new to milling, been baking for many years. Found you and jumped in. Yay. Susan, only about 1 year. Okay, Barbara, hi from Florida. Not new, been milling since 1998, off and on. Wow, good job, Barbara. You are a vet. Okay, so Kimberly, another one of my Grainies, considers a newbie. Colin, we have 1.5 years. Okay, then Suey, new to milling, bought like a month ago, the Nutrimill, based on your video, still in the box. I'm a little bit scared to start. Well, don't be scared, or do be scared and just start. Just start scared. You're gonna make mistakes. And that's another thing as well, is just know that for those of you who are new, do not be afraid of making mistakes. And I know that it's frustrating because you pay money for ingredients, things like that. And so it can be frustrating and feel like you're being wasteful when you make those mistakes. But just know that with every mistake that you make, you are still learning something and you're still able to improve your skill. So just see that as, with all mistakes, just learn from it, move on, try not to beat yourself up over it, and keep on going, because you're going to get this. All right, Deborah, 1.5 years, but I still mix with flour. Yeah, I know that that's really tempting, again, because it's kind of what everyone does. I'm one of the only ones other than Sue Becker out there. I'm kind of one of the main ones that only ever use 100% freshly milled flour. You will not see all-purpose flour on this channel. I will not be using it. The only time that I ever use all-purpose flour is I do have some that I keep mainly just like for dusting. Sometimes I want a lighter flour when it comes to dusting, or sometimes I've milled the exact amount of flour I need for my recipe and I just need a little bit more for dusting and I don't want to mill some more for dusting. So I use that. That's the main time I use. Okay. Good Times Homestead. My chickens love my mistakes. Yes, mine do too. So that's another thing is if you have chickens, the bread is definitely not wasted because someone is eating it. um, okay, let's see here. Okay, Just Me says it is frustrating when I only have a hand grain mill as though I love using it. It's a lot of work when I make mistakes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that would be. Barbara, I made some great door stops in the beginning. Yes, yes. My poor husband has, bless his heart. he he has had some interesting breads, I will say. He basically stopped trying biscuits before I got it right because he was tired of biscuits being ruined. But yeah. So but yeah, that's the biggest thing is grab my newbie nut guide because the biggest thing is whenever you're starting, all that you need is you need a way to grind your grains and you just need your basic ingredients. And as far as the wheat berries to start off with, I preach this all the time. Do not be distracted by like the ancient grains, all of these different types. You're going to realize there's so many types of grains, even down to should you get spring wheat or winter wheat? Don't worry about that. Just start simple. Just grab you a hard wheat, whether it's hard red or hard white. Don't worry about spring or winter. You're not going to know a difference right now. Just grab you a hard wheat for your yeast spreads, soft white wheat for your baked goods, and just start with that now. And then grab you one recipe and master it. Okay. And for here, I recommend it be my simple yeast spread loaf recipe. And I have that linked in the newbie guide. Just to go ahead and get you that good recipe and master it and then go from there. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You can do this. People have been doing this for thousands of years by hand without any of the fancy mixers and things like that. So if I can do this, you can do this. Trust me. All right. Colin says, when I started grinding, I quit buying flour. Totally. Yeah. That's great to just jump in. And I do encourage you to kind of do that as well, is to just don't buy the flour from the store. Don't, if that's going to be like a fallback for you, then just don't buy it. And that'll kind of force you to use that freshly milled wheat. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with some questions. Again, I do have that newbie guide, and that also leads me to the sponsor of this video, which is Pleasant Hill Grain. So for those of you who are new, I love Pleasant Hill Grain. They are a small company, family owned, but they are literally like the one-stop shop for us Grainies. If you were looking for a mixer, your grain mill, grains, all the baking things, and more, then you definitely want to check out Pleasant Hill Grain. They even have, first of all, they have all of the grain mills. So if you don't have a mill yet, they pretty much sell all of the good ones. And they have like a comparison chart guide to help you make that decision as well. And same with the mixers. They have all the great mixers in one place as well. Also a handy comparison chart so you can be able to compare to make a good decision. So you just have to go to grainsandgrit.com/PHG. Thanks for Pleasant Hill Grain for sponsoring this video. But if you're new, I do recommend checking them out. At the very least, it just simplifies the process by not having to go to like 5,000 different websites for various things that you're wanting. So I do recommend them, and thanks to Pleasant Hill Grain for sponsoring. So back to the questions that I have. So I'm looking down on my phone. These are several that I got from Instagram. Okay. I'm going to try and go in order here. Okay. That is not. Okay, so here's one from, looks like Alicia, I believe. How do you mill flour to be similar to all purpose? This is a good question because I don't know if she's meaning the fineness of it or to get a flour that looks like all purpose flour. As far as just milling a fine flour, I get asked that, like, how, how fine is fine? Fine is just, it's a fine flour. You're not going for a crazy light, pastry flour when you're just making bread. You just want a good fine flour. Now, I will tell you that depending on the wheat berries that you are using, um, it can vary on what the flour looks like. I find that soft white wheat, whenever you mill it fine, it's probably the closest to look like all purpose flour. Where if you were to do like hard red wheat, you can actually see kind of the reddish type bran and germ that's in the wheat berry. So it looks a bit coarser. It also feels a little coarser than a soft white wheat, but yet it's not. It's still a good fineness for flour. And you're going to start noticing these differences between the different wheat berries, these subtle differences in texture and taste when you do that. So just know that. So if you have a typical impact mill, if you're just on the fine type setting, that's going to be fine. For a stone grind mill, it does take some time to figure out exactly what setting you need for good fineness for bread. But just know you're just going for fine flour. You don't want big, gritty anything in there. That's it. So don't overthink it. Okay, so we had another one. I'm still getting hung up on soaking / souring the milled wheat. I'm not sure if they mean they don't know how to do it or if it should be done. And I'm going to be doing an updated video about the whole phytic acid debate very soon. But that's usually when it comes to soaking grains, sprouting. It all has to deal with the phytic acid debate. And I will go ahead, spoiler alert, to say that no, we do not have to soak or sour or sprout all of our grains at all time from now until forevermore. Amen. But as far as let me see, do I have that? Okay, I don't. I do already have a video, but it's very old, and I'm not even sure if it's really good because I was still learning the best way to put things in video format. But I do plan on remaking that. I do have a home milling 101 series that I'm working through right now. That will be one of the videos. So you can check that out on my channel. It is a playlist where I'm kind of walking through, starting from the beginning of why we should be doing this and walking through a lot of things. So those videos are still being added. But as far as soaking, souring, it's not a requirement in order to get the full health benefits of this. What is the most important is that you're using freshly milled wheat, bar none. Okay. Okay, Future Simplified. Hi, have you ever made seitan from milled wheat? I'm vegan and I use it for vegan meat. Okay, if I'm familiar with this, seitan I think is made from the gluten of wheat. And a simple answer to this is no. No, I do not. I have no desire to really personally, and I wouldn't know how to do it myself. You can buy Vital Wheat gluten and go from there. But as far as me extracting it myself, no, not happening. Okay, so best grains to mill to get white flour. Again, this kind of goes back to what I've answered before, where you're going to find that different wheat berries just get you different things. So you're going to find, for example, if you use hard white wheat berries, that the bread is going to turn out a little bit whiter than, say, a hard red wheat berries, where the bread is a bit more browner, has more of the whole wheaty type taste. So if you're wanting a bit more milder of a flavor in a yeast spread, I would go with a hard white wheat, not the hard red, which is going to be more of that typical whole grain taste. Okay. Let's see. Best tips for adapting recipes. My daughter isn't thrilled with some of the results. So the biggest thing with you can convert recipes. I do suggest my biggest advice with converting recipes is first of all, you may not want to start off immediately converting. You need to learn how freshly milled grains work first. So I suggest starting off with recipes for freshly milled wheat, getting an idea of how this wheat and this flour works together, and then when it comes to converting recipes, start with recipes that you are already very, very familiar with. So, for example, if you have a favorite cookie recipe and you want to convert that, then that's where I would start, because at least you have a really good idea of the end goal in mind. It will more than likely look a little different being made with freshly milled wheat, but I do recommend starting with a recipe you're very familiar with. And as far as converting, you have the choice in what flour you're wanting to use. So in general, when it comes to converting, if it's a yeast bread, you're going to want to go with a hard red or hard white wheat when converting, and it usually is a 1-to-1 ratio. Usually, again, it can be a little tricky. I now usually can convert right on the spot because I have a lot of experience doing this. But there are times, and where I'm just trusting my gut. Really. And, it's turned out well. For example, my brioche, which is already an advanced recipe, I converted that on the spot and succeeded on the spot. That would not have happened just a couple years ago. I actually surprised myself that I did not fail completely the first time, but I'm very, very experienced with this. Where if you are not, you may get it the first time, you may not. That's okay. Take notes. Try again. When it comes to baked goods, you're going to want a soft white wheat flour. And for every 2 to 3 cups of all-purpose flour called for in the recipe, you may need to increase the soft white wheat flour by about 1/4 to 1/2 cup. That is not always the case. It really just depends. But those type of baked goods are a bit more tricky to convert. But one thing you need to know, good news is something like cookies, you have an indicator of where you went wrong. Because with cookies, if your cookies are too flat, you did not use enough flour. You need to add a little bit more flour next time. If your cookies stay domed and they don't, flatten out like they should, you use too much flour. So as far as cookies goes, they're usually a bit easier to tell you where you messed up, and that's usually how much flour you've added. All right, Dan says, I nailed your yeast bread recipe first time. Easy, never milled grains before. That's wonderful. That's why I call it my simple yeast bread loaf recipe, because I find that I had figured out myself the recipe and the technique to where it's a fairly easy recipe to follow, even for those who are new. Okay, so let me see here. Okay. Oh, no, wrong one. Okay, got to keep going here. Oh, so, okay. Someone asked me, can you give good tips on making a good rye loaf? I personally have actually not made or have my own recipe for rye bread. I totally need to, because my husband loves rye bread. But do you know one thing I learned early on was rye bread does contain rye flour, but also regular white flour as well, regular wheat flour. So do not think that rye bread is made with just rye. It doesn't turn out well. Trust me, but I'm still working on my own recipe for that. Okay. And then how do we make sourdough bread with our wheat berries? Is that even possible? Oh, excuse me. So let's park it right here a little bit and talk about sourdough. So I am working on my sourdough recipe. The main reason I do not have it yet is pure laziness. It just takes time to do a sourdough. But I will say I had some breakthroughs and learned some key things in whenever I was making my own ciabatta bread recipe and experimenting with that. I learned some crucial elements that I'm going to be applying to sourdough to see if they transfer over. Because if you notice my ciabatta bread recipe, I was able to get a nice open crumb, which is those big holes in that bread, which I was starting to wonder if it was even possible to do with freshly milled wheat, but it is. And I learned some techniques with that, and just learned some lessons that I would like to apply over to sourdough. So I'm still working on it, but I can at least tell you some information about the sourdough starter. Okay, so I have tried making my own starter before with all freshly milled wheat. And it starts off well, but for some reason, after about a week or so, it just starts going wonky. And I do not know why. I have yet to figure this out, but it happened enough where I was getting so frustrated about it. So I ended up buying my starter. I actually got my starter from Azure Standard. And it's been going great. And I recommend buying a starter for two reasons. One is for that reason. It's a well-established starter, and two, it's a well-established starter because your bread is going to do much better the older the starter is. And I wanted to go ahead and start with a mature type starter right off the bat and not have to wait for a very long time, like over a month, I would say, to get a good starter. So that's why I did that. So if you want to, and if I was to start my own starter right now, I would actually start with regular store-bought flour first, get it going, well established, and then switch it over to feeding it freshly milled wheat. Because like the starter that I got from Azure Standard, I literally fed it every flour out there. I have fed it hard red, hard white, soft white, rye, camus, einkorn, some all-purpose flour. It just kind of depended on what I had, and it's done beautifully. And it's lasted for a couple years as well, including several months where I just put it in the fridge. So that's been my experience with the starter. Is once I had a good starter, it's done beautifully. So that's what I can say about starter, because I do get questions about it, especially feeding with fresh and milled wheat. So again, with it being well established, feed it whatever flour you have. And you'll find that some flours it likes better than others. But the bottom line is it does like when you discard half of it each time you feed it. That helps to keep it going. Whenever I was not discarding any of it, it went bad. So be sure that you're doing that. Okay, so probably a dumb question, but why do sourdough when the basic wheat loaf is so good? Okay, that's a good question, Sandra, which I did get this question as well. And I've done a video about this, is what is better, sourdough or yeast bread? And ultimately is I do concede that for thousands of years, any type of yeast type bread that humanity consumes was always some sort of sourdough type bread or wild yeast type bread, because commercial yeast was not available until the late 1800s. So I do think, excuse me, it is better, but what is best is that you're using real whole grains, that you're actually milling your wheat and consuming that flour, because that ultimately has all the nutrients. If you're using sourdough with dead fake flour, all you're getting are the benefits of the lactobacteria in the sourdough, but used with just nothing but gluten and starch, as opposed to if you are milling your own wheat, baking your own bread with commercial yeast, you are getting all of those nutrients from the actual wheat, regardless if you're using regular commercial yeast or sourdough. So I do think best is sourdough with fresh milled wheat. But if it's keeping you from milling your wheat because you think you have to do sourdough, just use commercial yeast, but just continue milling your wheat. I hope that makes sense. I did a video about that a while back. So, okay. So another one, oh, this is also a good question. Is it always beneficial to let fresh flour absorb liquid before mixing and kneading? I have found that, yes, there is a benefit. My breads typically just turn out better. And so that's why I just stick to it, because I just find it tends to be a bit softer of a bread. If you are using active dry yeast, do not skip that step, because you need to activate your yeast, and that is a needed step to activate your yeast. Otherwise, instant yeast, you technically can skip it. I just don't, because I find that it does help with the texture and to get things moving along. All right. So let me go back. See, I've missed some questions here. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so Future Simplified. I use a Vitamix dry container / blender to make flour out of my wheat berries. What are your thoughts on that? I do not have a stone mill or impact mill at this time. I say great job using for what you have. A Vitamix is a powerful enough blender where it definitely can get you fine flour. I used to have a Vitamix and realized by accident that it creates fine flour. The disadvantage of it is it's not as efficient at it as a standalone grain mill. It also is much slower, because I find you cannot do more than 1 cup at a time. And it's a blender, not necessarily designed for milling wheat. So you run the risk of putting your grains under a much higher temperature than a grain mill. That's why, but again, if you're doing it in small quantities, it'll do it pretty fast, where that's probably not an issue. But right now, do keep using what you have. You have a way of milling your grains, and keep at it, and then just save up for a standalone grain mill, which I do recommend, mainly because it's just easier. It is easier, it is faster, it is more efficient. And if you're like me, if it's easier, faster, and more efficient, you're more likely to do it. Okay. Let me see what other ones. Jane says, after milling hard white wheat, I will never go back to regular flour. I'm so happy to find your videos. Yay. Yay, conversion. Okay. All right. I think that might be it. So let me know if y'all have any other questions that you have for me. Okay. Kylie, asked, have I created a basic bread loaf with sourdough? So answer that question. I have not yet, where I've shared it or anything. Okay. One question from Instagram. When doubling recipes, are you supposed to double the yeast? I always do. If I'm doubling, I'm pretty much doubling everything. So yeah, just go ahead and double the yeast. If you don't, not the end of the world. Just know it's going to take much longer for the yeast to go through everything and for it to rise. So you don't have to if you don't want to, but just be aware that it's just going to take more time to rise. Okay. Yeah. Lori says, how long can freshly milled wheat be stored? I get this question a lot, like what to do with excess flour, those type of questions. So it depends on how you store it. Now, do you know that as soon as on day one, whenever you are milling that wheat berry and you are creating that flour, by the end of day one, 45% of nutrients have already been oxidized. And just by day 3, 90% of nutrients have been oxidized. Now, that is if you were to just take the flour and like leave it out on the counter. So as far as, that's why I recommend that you do not mill your wheat until you're actually ready to bake with it. Because once you have baked with the flour, then that is locked in the nutrients and you're good. But as far as, sometimes I do mill in advance, just the night before. Say if I'm making something for breakfast the next day, I might mill the night before just so I don't have to run my mill early the next morning. And that's totally fine. But otherwise, if you have to, for whatever reason, mill in advance, I would keep your flour in the freezer. because in doing so, it's going to really slow down any sort of oxidation. I do not know how long, but I do know that it will keep for a while in the freezer, which is also where I a lot of times keep excess flour. So if I've got excess flour and I want to hang on to it, I usually just keep a little baggie in my freezer that I just kind of dump it in. Sometimes I label what flour it is, sometimes I don't. And then if I find in a recipe where I need like, 1 tablespoon, a quarter cup, something like that, I just pull from the bag in the freezer instead of having to like go back to my mill over. So this is especially great with if I'm making gravies and I only need like a quarter cup of flour or something. I just pull from that bag from the freezer and it's just fine. Okay, so got another question. What are your thoughts on, I think that's auto lease? Yeah, so that's I do that process in my ciabatta recipe, especially. I do also kind of do it in my simple yeast bread recipe. Again, it does serve a purpose. It all depends on the recipe. So what it does is it goes ahead and starts kind of loosening up that gluten, relaxing the flour, go ahead and getting it going, which I do think when it comes to things like sourdough, those ciabatta breads where they're going to be a bit more finicky, it helps to kind of start that process going. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing it, but it has its place. There's a reason why you do it, and there's a reason why you can skip it sometimes. All right, Good Times Home said, your cinnamon rolls with the yeast bread recipe made me the hero in the house. Thanks for all your hard work. Oh, thank you. Cinnamon rolls, they make things better. They will always, people will always love you for the cinnamon rolls. Okay, so Kimberly, is there anything you have to do different when making gravy with milled flour? Nope. So when it comes, I've made, this is whether I'm making a white gravy, like for biscuits and gravy, or a brown gravy for mashed potatoes or whatever. Nope. Just use it with the flour. I do prefer to use soft white wheat flour when it comes to my gravies, because you do not see the little specks of like bran and stuff like that. And I find that it's just a good texture. But nope, other than that, whenever I make it, it's just however much all-purpose flour I would use. I'm just using the freshly milled flour. That's it. Okay, striped cheese bread, also good to do sourdough when you can't use sugar but need some flavor. Basic yeast without honey or butter is bland. Yes. Yes, I have to admit that is true. Okay, so Future Simplified, you are providing such a great supportive community for those of us who want to learn and improve our wholesome baking skills. Thank you. Oh, yay. No problem. And that's what I want to do. So again, if you would like to dive further, like I said, we do have the Grainie bunch. So you get even more diehard people, more diehard Grainies that in the Grainie bunch. We have a private community on MeWe. That's a free speech type platform. And then we also have our private live hangouts that we do. We did 2 this past month. So lots of fun there. But other than that, I think I've answered everyone's questions. So again, for those to kind of recap, if you are new to milling grains, and I'm typing all this in the chat box as well as it'll be in the description box. But if you haven't already grabbed yourself a free newbie milling guide, be sure to do so, because it kind of walks you through the process and also links to videos and recipes and things like that. And it's all for free. And I link, the grain mills, how to choose a grain mill, all of that stuff. It's in the guide and it answers a lot of your questions. So be sure to grab that. It does sign you up for my weekly newsletter that a lot of people seem to enjoy. That just goes out on Tuesdays. Once a week, you get a little newsletter from me. That hopefully you will stick around to read. Okay, real quick, Bonnie, what is the best grain mill that won't break the bank? That's a loaded question. So it really, the best grain mill to get is one that you will use. I will say your impact mills tend to be a bit on the cheaper side, or like less money than a stone grind mill, but it really depends. Oh, Futures, do you still use Azure Standard? I do. And actually, this coming out week, I'm finally releasing a couple of hauls that I've done with Azure Standard. So it's going to be about, I think, 2 or 3 months of hauls with Azure Standard. So I do still use them, not as much for grains. Because it just kind of depends. I have a ton of grains. And so if I need a certain grain, I might get it, or I a lot of times get grains from Pleasant Hill Grain or other sources as well. So it kind of depends. If I need a grain at the time, I'll add it on. But yeah, so be sure to look out for that video because that is coming. Okay. Oh, and another thing I will say, it's come to my attention that for those of you who are needing grain mills or mixers, there's a sale coming up. I do not know what will be on sale. I don't know any other details, but I was told that I think in October, I think early October, I think the point is to go along with the Amazon Prime Day sale because I think they've got another one coming up. And so I do think there will be sales to kind of compete with the Amazon one. So there will be, so be on the lookout. If again, follow me on Instagram, on YouTube, here on YouTube, join my newsletter because I definitely send out emails and let you guys know anytime that there are sales. And then of course we have the big Black Friday and holiday sales coming up in November, which are always really, really good. So if you've had your eye on some high-end ticket items, good news. Sales are coming up in the next few months. So, Ellen, Nutrimil sale. Yeah, I think, I want to say it's Nutrimil is going to be doing a sale in October, but I do not know what all is involved and what it is. So we will find out. And as soon as I know and I can tell you, I will tell you. All right. So if no other questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So thank y'all so very much for being here, especially with the new time. First time we've ever done a live on a Saturday, but I appreciate, as always, that y'all being here, being supporters of Grains and Grits, for subscribing and all the likes and the comments that y'all give. I love you guys so much. Y'all are amazing. And again, shout out to all my Grainies out there because I know y'all were here. SC Bosh, I'm late. We'll rewind. Yes. So if you missed anything, no problem. Just rewind. This video will still be up on my channel. But as always, y'all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Beginning of the week starting soon. And yeah, that'll be it. I'll see you guys later. Bye.